Hey loves, I'm Marley Liss, and welcome to the Sensual Revolution. This is a global movement to reclaim sensual empowerment on an embodied and systemic level. My personal path of sensuality has not been easy. Shame around my body image, sexual abuse, and my queerness had me dissociated and numbed the heck out. It's been a big journey to get to where I am today, but I really have turned my pain to purpose. Along the way, I've learned our personal healing makes epic waves in this world. This podcast is here to remind you that your healing is selfless. When you learn to shed shame, love your body, and claim your worth, you pave the way for all people to do the same. Here, you can expect to hear from sexual educators and healers who work at the embodied level of sensual empowerment, as well as policymakers and justice leaders who work at the systemic level. It's all connected. So whether you're at the very beginning of your own sensual healing journey, or you're a sex-positive advocate and superstar, this community welcomes you. Let's come together and revolutionize this planet one loving, sensual step at a time. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of the Sensual Revolution. I am so stoked for you to hear today's episode, which is featuring the amazing Eva Bloom. Eva Bloom is so epic. They are an award-winning queer sexuality educator, sex science communicator. They know kind of everything there is to know about sex. Maybe that's a big statement, but it was a pretty epic conversation. Eva aims to break down the rigid scripts around sexuality and affirm marginalized individuals to build their most authentic sex lives, feel at home in their identities, and have confidence in navigating their sexual health, which we all need. They're also the creator of the digital sexual wellness program called Fuck the Patriarchy, Fuck Yourself. We love it. And the YouTube web series What's My Body Doing? This was such an amazing conversation. Eva gets really vulnerable about her journey with sexuality and overcoming shame, becoming a sex researcher. We dive deep into modern day sex education, why so many humans, including myself and Eva, came out during the pandemic. We talk about the marginalization of queer women, non-binary folk. We talk about how TikTok has been a haven for the LGBTQ community. We also look at how systems of patriarchy, cis heteronormativity manifest in our bodies and impact our sex lives. We get into fat phobia, desire, how queer perspectives are liberating for literally everyone, not only queer people. And we also get into a really fun conversation about Harry Potter houses and how these relate to different sexual identities. Very much, yes. Even if you're not a huge Harry Potter nerd, you are going to love it. I don't know that much about the houses, but this was like so much fun to get into. So before we dive into today's episode, I want to share as well that the Sensual Wholeness Academy is open for enrollment. It has been the most beautiful community that we're creating in that space. We welcome all women-identified folk who are reclaiming sensuality, body love, transforming trauma, cultivating empowered intimacy. It's such an amazing 8-month group coaching program with myself and the SWA team, and we would just love to welcome you in if it feels aligned. What you can actually do is go to the link in the show notes to get the details. You can sign up directly, but you can also book a one-to-one call with myself where you'll receive personalized support in your own sensual reclamation journey and exploring if this is for you. So it's always an honor to connect with you all. It really, really is. And to hear your stories and to just get to know your fabulous self. So check it out and let's get into today's episode. Hello, beautiful people. I'm so excited to be here with Eva Bloom, such an amazing human. How are you today?
I'm doing so great. I'm so excited to chat.
Me too. I'm super stoked. I was telling Eva, I'm like, I spent the whole morning and a little bit of last night, like going into so much of your content. And I actually first discovered you through Ashley Gavin's podcast, which is the best. It's so good. And I was like, goals, connect with Eva for this podcast. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yes.
I love finding out how people like found me, and I'm glad that you hearing about my coming out story and the threesome brought us together.
Oh my gosh, as a sort of baby gay, maybe I'm like a toddler gay now. So much of it was so relatable. I mean, I have not had the same epic threesome experience that was not relatable, but maybe someday it will be.
Yeah. Dream big.
Dream big, yes. Tell the people, actually, first I'll just ask this kind of cool meta question you can answer in a really practical way or however you feel. Who are you in this chapter of your life?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's such an interesting question, especially like a year and a half into like COVID and the transformation that has happened over this period.
Yeah.
I am a queer, gender questioning, sex science communicator and peer sexuality educator. So much of that is consuming my life right now is like the launch of my course.
Yes.
Which is about kind of helping people unlearn all of the garbage we learned growing up about sex and actually creating something beautiful. What else? Yeah, I spend a lot of my time bringing sex science to the people and also talking about and consuming a lot of gay shit.
Yes, great, amazing. And then can you share a little more about the work you're doing right now, and feel free to like be braggy as well. You have a very epic bio and background. Yeah.
Thanks, Marley. So as a sex science communicator, I have my master's of science, kind of focusing on social psychology. I did my master's thesis on sexting. So I use that and kind of my own experience and sexual journey to create my course, Fuck the Patriarchy, Fuck Yourself, which takes a bunch of sex research to look at the ways that the cis heteropatriarchy fucks with our desires and our ability to tap into authentically like what our pleasure is, and then build like a solo sex and a sexual relationship with ourselves, which is really beautiful. I'm trying to think what else. I was on YouTube for many, many years. That's how I got my start kind of in sex education in like a social media public facing kind of way. Also I do. I run a newsletter where I take academic papers and I break it down and so that people can read and get nerdy with it too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay, we love the intersection of sexuality and nerdiness. It's amazing.
That's all.
Yes. Okay, so this is all fantastic and it's definitely super incredible, edgy, taboo work. I imagine that a lot of the times you bring this up and people are like, whoa, you're talking about that at the dinner table. Like, I would love to hear about how you yourself got to a place where you're so comfortable and empowered talking about this. Like, what has your journey with sexuality and maybe overcoming shame, what has that looked like?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I get the vibe that this might be an astrology safe space that I
Yes. Astrology safe space. Yeah.
If you say like you're like, oh, it's such a taboo topic. People must give you like weird looks about it. And I'm like, I'm a Scorpio sun, Aquarius rising. So that's kind of I love that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll be in the taboo. Love to make people a little bit uncomfortable. I it honestly for me never felt really weird to like apply my nerdiness to sexuality from like the beginning of kind of my journey when sexuality became relevant to me, I became like a huge nerd about it. I was like watching all these YouTube videos. I like founded my high school's like gender sexuality alliance when I was 16, and I was giving like peer lessons like to my friends, like really consuming everything that I could. And when I got to university and found out that like people research sex like as a job, this is a thing that people do, I was like, this is the coolest stuff ever. And I do remember a little bit of like the program I was in undergrad was like very small, and we had like a pretty close relationship with our professors, and it was very research focused. And I do remember there being moments being like, I'm into this research thing, but like I want to research sex. Is that okay? Am I allowed to do that? And I think they were a little bit like, that's not my expertise, but we support whatever you want to do. You're clearly very fired up about this.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of always been a part of, and I just started talking about it because it seemed to be helping people. And I was like, I feel comfortable doing it. It seems like people need it. Let's just keep doing it.
Yeah, this is so amazing. And I also feel like it's so rare to kind of grow up with that level of certainty and just like, this is important, this lights me up, this is what I want to do. Were you raised like in a sex positive family? Did you have like this kind of epic, I don't know about you, but like my sex education, there was no mention of queerness. It was very like banana on a condom, you're gonna bleed out your coochie, call it a day. How?
How did this happen?
How did this happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Ooh. Okay. I guess like a couple things. For one, like my sex ed was pretty similar to yours. I remember my gym teacher, who's in charge of health, being like coincidentally absent during the health unit on various sports related activities, and I was like, okay, you just timed this just right. So I remember like supply teachers giving us like diagrams of like the reproductive systems for us to label. That's basically the only thing I remember from my sex ed. In terms of like my family and stuff, I don't talk about this a lot, but my dad is a minister. But in like a very progressive kind of church. So I remember I went to my first Pride at my church's like Pride float, and I guess in Toronto, Canada, that is maybe a little bit more common. But yeah, I remember doing that. I remember my parents having like very close like queer family friends growing up, so I definitely knew that like queer people were a thing. The compet was still incredibly strong, and I think also the difference between like gay men are a thing, queer women being cool and of all sorts of gender expressions, maybe less of a thing. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I do enjoy pushing my family's buttons in terms of sex, and definitely bring up at the dinner table and be like, what do you think about this? And I'll be like, I don't know.
I love it. I love the demeanor with which you do it too, because it's so like kind of joyful and sunny and casual, and also like so challenging for people's deeply internalized beliefs and suppression around this. So it's just amazing. Can you tell the people what comp het is?
Yeah, I forget that not everybody realized they were lesbian in quarantine and therefore figured out what comp het is.
That was me. That was me for sure.
Same.
Was that yay? Shout out to all the beautiful humans who came out or had huge gender and sexuality revelations during the pandemic. We're with you. Yeah.
We need a support group, honestly. Should we start a podcast?
100%.
I know like 3 other people. Anyway, compat is short for compulsory heterosexuality. And it basically just means that like ingrained in our like systems of how I think, oh my gosh, in terms of our gender systems, in terms of our family unit systems, in terms of the government, it's like assumed that people are cisgender and heterosexual. And that there's it's assumed. There's also kind of like propaganda from when we are very small. And there's a lot of like censor and like pushback if you do not fall into that category. And especially for women, like a lot of our gender roles and like what it means to be a woman is inexorably linked with being straight. So a lot of people grow up thinking like straight is the only option and assume attraction to men as like a default, and write off attraction to women and non-binary people as like we're just really close friends, or like everybody feels like that and just doesn't talk about it.
Yeah, this is such an amazing thing to learn about, so thank you for sharing. Like, I know 2 of my also baby gay came out during the pandemic friends. We made a little video on like gay signs and all the signs that like we should have known in hindsight that we were gay. And a bunch of straight humans were like, how did you not know? Like, how did that happen? Like, and you missed it. And I really think it is because of compet. And like you said, that kind of default assumption of you have to be into men or you must be into men, like prerequisite for valid existence.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, this isn't totally related to compet, but kind of what I was saying, like, I think like as queer identities have become more mainstream, we still see like white cis gay men as like the forefront of what it means to be queer, and women, non-binary people like bisexual, trans people, still don't have that representation. And I feel like if I had seen more like cool, hot lesbians like portrayed in a positive light, it would have been more like, oh, that's possible.
Yes, so possible. Okay, I'm not gonna pretend that I like didn't listen to a podcast where you talked about some of these things right before this, but it has been so common for so many people to come out during the pandemic or to realize like new identities, claim new identities. Why do you think that is?
Part of it, I think, is that people are no longer forced to interact with like the cis hetero world. You don't have to like, we were in such a, quarantine took us out of this pattern where it's like every day you wake up and you have to talk to your straight male colleagues and you have to like go on a subway with like all these people and you have to like put on this like put on your straight suit to interact. And when you don't have to do that, I think like people became their own audiences, and people got to be like, oh, like I'm not seeing anybody else today. Like I can really exist in the way that feels authentic to me. And I think also like just having more time for reflection. And I mean, we talk about how capitalism likes to like keep us grinding to the point of exhaustion where we don't have any time to reflect on like other things, including might be queer.
Yeah.
And then also talk about TikTok, which is so wild, but I feel like for many people TikTok was like the first place of like homonormativity, where you can like log onto the platform and like see queer people living their everyday life in just a totally like normalized way.
Absolutely. It's really like you were saying, the power of representation. And like, had you seen some super hot, not hetero people growing up, it'd be a different story. And definitely TikTok did that for me, and did that for so many. I remember connecting with someone in like super small town, very red state America, and they were like, it wasn't until I got TikTok that I even realized there are other people feeling what I'm feeling in terms of
Mhm.
queerness. And I was like, wow, bless you, TikTok.
It's true. The TikTok creators did not anticipate to create the best intervention for addressing combat out there, but they
Yeah,
did.
they really, really, really did. I saw a TikTok too that was like, it took me 20 something years to realize I was gay. It took the algorithm 1 minute. And that was definitely the case for me. I was like, why am I on lesbian TikTok? Is everyone on lesbian TikTok?
Reader, no, not everyone was on
Not
lesbian TikTok.
everyone. Yes, amazing.
Mhm.
Okay, so all of these words that are big words like patriarchy, capitalism, cis heteronormativity, um, I think that for some people, it's like those feel like big words and big
Mhm.
concepts, and it maybe gets stuck in the head. So can you tell us, like, how do these systems actually manifest in our bodies, and like how might patriarchy be impacting our sex lives, whether we know it or not?
Yeah, what a crack. So many ways. So one thing I think to start off in terms of thinking about like patriarchy in our sex lives is that like the whole way that we frame sex and everything that we get taught about sex growing up is centered around the type of sex that benefits cishet white men. Like when we
Mhm.
think of real sex, and there are studies where like you ask people on the street like what counts as real sex, and what is like the type of sex that is not censored in movies, the type of sex that like in religious organizations or in sex ed you talk about sex that's like penetrative sex.
Mhm.
um, there are all these script when we think about like how bodies are supposed to work, how bodies are supposed to get turned on, how desire is supposed to work, all of that, the norm is centered around what is experienced in cis men.
Mhm.
um, yeah, and we think when we think about things like compat too, and like when, when we think about like what like women and non-binary people's like role as sexual beings are.
Mhm.
It's to be sexual objects, it's to have sex with men, it's to perform, and all of these things kind of disconnect women and non-binary people from our authentic desire in order to
Mhm.
like serve a larger cis heteropatriarchy. And I think with capitalism too, um, a lot of it is around like the diet industry,
Mhm.
um, that we can buy our way to being happier and lovable by making ourselves smaller. And again, making ourselves smaller is also in connection to patriarchy too, making women and non-binary people as small and weak and non-threatening as possible.
Mhm.
And we know that fat phobia is super connected with desire. If you feel like your body, if you don't like your body, if you're really mean to your body, there's so much research to show that that's really going to impair you like feeling pleasure in it.
Mhm.
um yeah, and that yeah, that we can really buy our way to sexual happiness, whether it's like sex toys, or you gotta shave your whole body to have sex, like all that stuff.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so many shoulds and expectations and
Mm-hmm.
comparisons, and like, I'm supposed to look like that feelings and sound like that feelings. And
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate this education, because I think so often we have thoughts that are like, um, I guess I'm just an insecure person. Or, you know what I mean? Like putting it on ourselves. We're like, I guess I'm just super insecure. I don't know why I can't get over this like body image stuff. I don't know why I don't feel good enough. And we really like put that blame on ourselves. And this is like this huge like curtain lifting moment of like, hey, it didn't actually come from you. There's a lot going on here that leads to that messaging. On that note, I feel like this is like exactly what your program's about. Like, it's called Fuck the Patriarchy, Fuck Your Life, which is amazing. What inspired you to create that, and how does it tie into what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, so I think you're totally right that like so many people internalize all of these things that say like it's something wrong with me, I'm broken. And I think a lot of like sexuality educators and like the sexual wellness industry can perpetuate that in some ways, to say like, here are these different things that like you can do to like increase your libido, or like spice things up with your partner, or like buy this sex toy, because like within like the Western worldview and like within capitalism, it's very individualistic. And also like by focusing on the individual, you don't have to disrupt any of these like larger systems. So for me, I think also like in my own journey, like I did so much work on like, okay, how can I fix how I'm broken? Like, let me learn everything about it. But it wasn't until I started like unlearning compet and like decentering the cishet like male perspective on like what sex is and what pleasure is, did I actually like really experience like pleasure, and I think like a more whole and embodied sense of sexuality. So the purpose of the course is kind of to be like, please, like I want to help you not spend years like spinning your wheels, feeling broken, trying to like do all this like internal work, when really like most people did get good sex ed, and you have to throw out all this shit that you were taught that's causing you to feel all this pain and shame to begin with.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you exist and that you're doing this work. I know you've done like web series for kids too, and it just, again, like you were saying, like if you had seen Super Hot, and like growing up, I'm like, imagine we had all received sex education like this growing up. Something that I'm super excited to talk about is like, how do you feel like this queer perspective on sex education can be empowering for everyone? Because I imagine that there's some queer folks listening who are like, I love this is amazing. And then I imagine that there's some straight folks who are like, I was going to be like, when are we going to talk about me? But what I really mean is like, how does this apply to me? So I'd love to know, like, yeah, why is this important for everyone?
Yeah, well, I think like if we look at like research, and there's a really cool researcher called Peggy Kleinplatz, and one of her big kind of frameworks is like working from the margins and looking at how, I think she really looks at like kink and BDSM communities, like disabled sexuality educators, and like queer people, and like really that people who have had to think really deeply and intentionally about their sexuality, and like build frameworks and ways of connecting that are outside of this very cis hetero model, actually have like such amazing, expansive, like positive outcomes of sexuality. I remember reading this paper around like couples who've just like given birth and stuff, and how that experiences like after having a baby and wanting to have sex again. And one of the findings was that couples who had a broader definition of what sex is, were much more sexually satisfied after giving birth. And when I say it like that, it's like kind of like a no duh, like finding maybe that it's like, oh, if you release this pressure on yourself and like expand to other forms of intimacy, things are going to go better. But I feel like that's one example of how like queer perspectives on sexuality can benefit kind of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I'm having a very distinct memory of when I worked in the Toronto's gay village when I was like quote quote straight, just like you with your like founding the GSA when you were quote quote straight. And yeah, I remember having a similar thought. I had experienced sexual trauma like just a few months before working in that space. And I just felt so shut down and like confused by sexuality. And I remember having this realization like, wow, the whole queer community has actually been asked to and has needed to take time to reflect on sexuality and what that means. And I remember being like, wow, this is so amazing and empowering. And at the time I was just like, okay, this is my first taste of like sex positive spaces. But yeah, I think that is so real that some people, especially if they do feel like cisgender or heterosexual, they may have just not thought about some of this. They're just like, the script has been given to me. I don't need to think about it.
Yeah, it fits well enough. Like, yeah, versus people that need to like intentionally be creative and like question things, be like, actually, this doesn't work for me. What else is out there?
Yeah, what else? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, another example I think of how like research shows that like queer perspectives on sex can maybe be helpful to everyone is one of my favorite YouTube videos I ever make that I'm gonna turn into a TikTok. Cool. Is like the 4 different research findings that show that queer women have more orgasms.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah, that like this, and again, it might be a no duh moment, but that like the sex sessions are longer. There's a greater variety of things that are happening. There is, including things like oral sex and like hand sex that are kind of shown to be more effective at and more connected to orgasm. Yeah. So I think like, yeah, it feels sometimes I imposter syndrome, like straight people don't want to hear about like sex ed from like a lesbian, but I'm like, I swear, I promise we have helpful insights.
It is helpful. It is helpful. You know what comparison it just reminded me of is like shifting from working for someone else and being given the tasks that you have to do all day long to like becoming an entrepreneur and being like, well, what do I actually want to do and what do I actually want to create? And it's kind of sounds like that. It's like society's like, hey, girl and boy having sex, here's what you do. Da, 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 da. And then when you step away from that script, there's that kind of solo moment where you're like, oh God, like, what do I actually want? What do I actually like? And kind of being creative in our sexuality. So yay, I don't know if does that feel like an accurate relation?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's literally on the nose. Like, the 9 to 5 was like created in a place where like men were the only ones going to work and women stayed at home. So like it was created assuming that you have somebody to do all this care work. Like the traditional work structure is totally like a white cis heteropatriarchal like creation. So stepping away, you're literally being like, no, I refuse. I'm gonna create a better system for myself.
Which I will say, like, that's so liberating and it's scary, right? I find it's a bit scary. And so, and then you brought up imposter syndrome too. Can you talk about like queer sex ed as like a need? Because it's like we don't want to be given those rigid scripts, but we also need and deserve guidance. So like, yeah, can you share anything you're inspired to share on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, okay. Can you rephrase your question? Like, are you?
Yeah. Okay. So okay, I'll rephrase it in a way that's like more vulnerable and real for me, which is like the imposter syndrome thing Okay, so for me, I was doing like this sexual wellness, sex educator thing for years, and I identified as straight, and then I identified as bi, and then like newly coming out as gay and being in the sexual education space. It's like a little scary because I'm like, I feel like I knew what I was talking about before, and now I'm kind of at the beginning stages. And I think what I experienced, and I hear this a lot with a lot of different humans, is like having shame around having shame. Does that make sense? Like you're like, you feel insecure and then you also feel ashamed of feeling insecure. And I think it comes back to what the gorgeous work you're doing of being like, hey, this isn't just about your flaw, it's about the whole system. So I don't know if this is really a question or a share, but I'm just like, what reflections do you have around that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thanks for sharing. And I mean,
Yeah.
like I can definitely relate. Like
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have share like a similar sense of like I'm a sex educator, I'm talking about all these things. I've never been in like a queer relationship that was like aligned for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, so I know that there's wisdom that I'm gonna learn in that I like haven't I haven't received yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah. I try and go back to the idea that like I truly think that there are like fundamental principles around sexuality that are applicable to everybody, no matter who your partner is, like whether you are like new to a sexual partner or a situation or like old, but that like tools like communication, like
Mm-hmm.
reflection, um, like accurate information about like anatomy and desire and arousal, um, and like doing the work to unpack the like lies and myths, like I think that is like the foundational work that's going to help kind of everybody no matter where they're at. And I think a beautiful educator, Samantha Biddy, who's also in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
I think she said that like worries about like being inexperienced um, are kind of unfounded because every new sexual partner you have is a new sexual experience. Like everybody
Mm-hmm.
likes something different. Like you can really what you're bringing in is those like foundational communication skills and the knowledge of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, you're new
I
every
love that.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's so important. It's like stepping away from those assumptions and being caring. And I feel like that segues perfectly into the compassionate casual sex that you talk about. And also very curious about the wording you use of fuck like a Hufflepuff. Please tell us more about that and what that means.
Yeah. So how to fuck like a Hufflepuff. I'm a millennial Gen Z cusp, so I do have some millennial traits of being a big Harry Potter fan. And I don't know, I had this idea in my head that like Hufflepuffs are very kind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're very compassionate, they're very curious and like hardworking. And I brought it together with this idea that like casual sex can also be compassionate and supportive and lovely. So yeah.
Sorry, I'm just laughing in my head because I'm just like, does that make Slytherin like the non-consensual approach? You're just like slithering in, like no, no
Oh,
asking, no checking.
I don't think so. The question I do ask at the beginning of the workshop is like, what do you think your Harry Potter style is in bed, and who do you think is your most compatible house in
I
bed?
love this. I love this. Okay, just for fun, can you give us like a very like brief glimpse into each Harry Potter house and the assigned sexual style?
Yes. Oh my god, I did a whole video on this with Hannah Witten, who's also a big Harry Potter nerd. But oh my gosh, in my conception, I would say that like Ravenclaws are like huge sex nerds. They got all the books. In my mind, like as I'm saying this, I'm like, I'm projecting all of the different houses to be very kinky. Maybe that says more about me than it does about the houses. But I'm like,
maybe
like,
Hogwarts is just like, in this analogy, Hogwarts is just like a safe space for kinky and queer folks.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I would say the Ravenclaws are the big sex nerds. They're like going by the book. I think also like they maybe with their sexual partners, they're like, I want to be able to please you. Please give me your handbook. I want to check off all the boxes and do all the things.
Yeah.
I would say that like Gryffindors are maybe a little bit more adventurous.
Okay.
They're the type of people that's like, I'll try anything once. Like, fuck me up. Like, what do you like to do? Okay, let's try that.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would maybe, yeah, I'm trying to think of Slytherins. Yeah, okay. Slytherin traits are being cunning, being ambitious. I feel like in the dating world, Slytherins have got that like dating profile like perfected. They're like, I know what I want. Like I am not fucking around with like any garbage. I have my perfect date planned. Like I have the red flag questions off the top, and I will walk out before dinner arrives. If this is not up to my standard.
Yeah, we love a strong boundary for sure. Amazing. Okay, and then also in my head, you're like, I feel like this is a safe space for astrology. I'm like taking this way too far in my head, and I'm like, I feel like these are the astrological signs that would go with each house.
Me too.
Like which one did you say was adventurous? Gryffindor was like Sagittarius.
I'm a Sag, Mars, and Venus.
Work, I'm Sun and Rising Sag.
Oh, love that.
Okay, so let's get into Hufflepuff. What does that look like? What does compassionate, and of course we want to bring this compassionate casual sex into any Harry Potter house you may identify with.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think like it's interesting. Like I created the workshop after kind of being in college, like participating in like the hookup culture of it all, like when I identified as a straight woman sleeping with other men, and realizing like, oh, there are gaps in like how we teach people that like casual sex should be, and like with all these like gendered norms and like expectations too, things get like pretty icky. So I realized I'm like now after being in this space for a couple years and like coming out and like reading more from like queer educators and like kinky educators, I realized that the workshop is basically just like aftercare is important.
Yeah.
Like when you're with a partner, even if it's a casual partner, like talking about what your needs are afterwards, like being present and like kind is important. And like before care is like also important. And really like a lot of the workshop too is about like reflecting on what your own needs and wants and boundaries are and communicating that to a partner so that people are on the same page. So hopefully people don't get hurt. And also that you're getting the type of casual sex that you want.
This is so huge for people. I know this was huge for me, like just realizing communication is an option. I think so often we're just like, oh, like I wish this person would do this and this and this, but we never ask for it. We never communicate it. And yeah, what was like your experience? It kind of sounds like you, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of sounds like you learned about a lot of these things in an academic sense and then applied them to your life. Do you feel like that is true a bit?
I think a little bit of both. I think part of it is like, I'm experiencing this. I wonder if there's any research on it. And back and forth. And I mean, I think like I also had like one very positive like friends with benefits experience, and I was like, oh, I don't think everybody has an experience like this. I think this was nice. Write some notes about what was helpful here.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's that same experience of just like, we need to experience a what else, like an alternative. Yay, I'm very happy that you've experienced that, and that like your life was inspiring your research life, and now your research life is inspiring your life and your work, and it's really cool. Yeah, what do you feel like has shifted for you in your own life and like in your own sense of safety through like applying what you've learned around communication and aftercare and compassionate sex and all of these beautiful things?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of like navigating casual sex, like doing that reflection that like friends with benefits is much preferred for me in terms of like one night stands. And being like pretty deliberate in terms of like, as I'm going out and like looking for people, like having these conversations about what are you looking for, like what do you like value in these situations. And I think, yeah, definitely like feeling more empowered to like communicate and like not be afraid to do that. I remember there was a situation with a friends with benefits of mine where I had to it ended up that I was going to stay over when I hadn't planned to stay over. And I was like, there's actually two beds. I would feel more comfortable not sleeping in the same bed together. And they were like, oh my God, thank God. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I wanted that too. And I was really nervous because like there are like norms or whatever around like sharing a bed. And I thought like maybe you would think that I wouldn't like you if we did this. And I was like, no. we gotta ask for the things.
Yeah.
And I think like speaking more broadly about like how unlearning these like norms has impacted my own sex life. I think most of my sexual growth has happened in my solo sex life. Like literally removing like all partners and just being like, this is exclusively for me. And things like, I mean, like finding like erotic materials that are affirming, and like showing myself a lot of self-compassion around like what my actual like response like pattern is, like what my desires are. Yeah. And I think too, like with you're talking about like the shame a little bit around like not having experiences that maybe we want to have. I think like I feel very passionate that like solo sex is a valid form of sex that is like incredibly powerful and transformative, and like my expertise like in that area are like and are valid.
Yeah, 100% valid. I think that self-pleasure, masturbation, I think that this is probably like the most taboo. Maybe it's not, but it's a super taboo thing. And there's so much shame wrapped around self-pleasure, masturbation, like so much shame. Why do you think that is? And how can we shift away from that?
Ooh, I mean, not to be a broken record, but again, I think like masturbation is like a revolutionary like fuck you to the cis hetero patriarchy, because you're saying, I actually do not need you to bring me pleasure. I do not need to settle for whatever this experience is going to be. I am self-sufficient. And I think that's really like scary to people. And I think in like, what's the word? Not intimidating, threatening to people. And I think that is kind of why there is so much shame and like, you can't masturbate. And like, especially for like women the narrative that like, oh, if you masturbate, that's like kind of gross, or like you're like a slut if you masturbate, like these kind of messages, because it is like a genuinely powerful thing. So we want to discourage you from doing it.
Yeah. Yes. There's such a like, I don't need anything. I don't need, yeah, that's again the compat narrative of like, you need a man usually to
Mm-hmm.
experience pleasure and fulfillment. It
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of statement of like liberation. Um, yeah, I love this conversation so much because I just think this is the thing that we're like, you can't talk about that. I
Mm-hmm.
remember going to a somatic sex ed training and they were like, just have a conversation about your favorite ways and positions and stimulus and toys to self pleasure with. And we were like, what? And it had that kind of energy of when you're like young at a sleepover and you're kind of like telling secrets. And it was so innocent. And I think that was a very big reclamation for me, and is for so many, is this idea that our sexuality, even if it's wild and kinky and like all the things, it can also be innocent, and it is innocent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you share about your journey with reclaiming self pleasure in whatever way feels good for you?
Yeah. Well, I was a pretty late bloomer to solo sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like as a sex educator, and like, or as an aspiring sex educator and sex nerd, I like heard about the idea of like masturbation, that like, oh, it's this amazing cool thing. And I would like try it, and I'd be like, I don't really, really get what's all the hype is about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I got my first sex toy, and that was one of the first moments where I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
okay, this is more pleasurable than sex with my boyfriend. Interesting information. I would lock that away. But yeah, I think I also like didn't have like my first orgasm until like a bit later in life. um and I think, yeah, it took like realizing that lube is a very important sex toy, especially
Mm-hmm.
like if you are a person with a vulva. Like lube and masturbation can make a huge difference.
Yay. Yeah.
And that like masturbation does not have to be like simply inserting things. That the clit is a wonderful organ. um yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, yeah, and like trial and error of like sex toys, and I think also doing that internal work around like combating shame and really centering myself in
Mm-hmm.
um, my experiences. And now I'm like, oh, it's the best thing ever.
Yeah, yay, agree. Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable. I think too, just the power of hearing
Mm-hmm.
those reflections. And I think that all of us, when we hear stories and journeys like that, we see little glimpses of ourselves and we're like, oh, I need to hear that. I needed to hear someone casually normalize lube, like
Yeah.
it's so important. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely a late bloomer with self pleasure too. And it has been such a beautiful path of reclamation and like self love and body love for me as well. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for sharing about that. Definitely reminds me of the fact that you have like a documentary in the making with what is like with sexuality and technology. What is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Um, I've been working with an amazing director and filmmaker over the pandemic to create a documentary based on my master's thesis around
Mm-hmm.
sexting. And really basically like uplifting the voices of like women and non-binary people, talking about the role that sexting actually plays in their lives, because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times like the media narrative around sexting around women and non-binary people is like, oh, it's so dangerous, like
Yeah.
like really like put people in the position of like victims and like removing their agency in their experiences of sexting. So I think we really want this documentary to be like put the mic back in people's hand and be like, tell me what it actually is. Because I think that like sexting can be such an incredible place to like be some of the first places where women and non-binary people like write down and speak their desires into existence. And also a place to connect with masturbation and solo sex. So I am a very like strong advocate for sexting, and of course like aware of like harm reduction strategies. But I think like moving the conversation into a more like pleasure focused place is very exciting for me.
Yeah, amazing. I'm so excited to see this, and congrats. That's really cool.
It's slow going, but
yeah. Yeah, it'll totally happen. That's amazing. Definitely makes me think of like shout out to Laura DiCarlo. We did, I think the second episode of this podcast was with Laura on like sex tech and the world of sex tech and the need for gender equity in that space. So that's super cool and aligned. I feel like you should probably be friends if you're not already.
Yes.
But yes, time has like flown super fast. How can people connect with your amazing work? And please feel free to share more about your program, which looks so amazing as well.
Yeah, so folks can find me mostly on Instagram and TikTok at What's My Body Doing. My website is evabloom.ca. My live program is called Fuck the Patriarchy, Fuck Yourself. It's a 14-week live program with a bunch of workshops and guest speakers and sexy homework for building a pleasure practice. It's really exciting. I don't know the timing of when this episode will be released, but we have our second cohort starting next week on October 26th. But I'm sure that there will be other cohorts in the future. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to evabloom.ca/FPFY program.
Yay, thank you. And I'll put all those links in the notes so it's super easy to find. Sometimes I channel a really ridiculous closing message, and I just had a question to ask you. So, okay, imagine, you know, like the CoStar app that gives like astrological messages each day. If you were like a CoStar app, but it was about sexual wellness, like a message of sexual wellness, what would be the message that you would give people today?
Oh my God. I love it. Oh, okay. Well, in terms of like also astrology stuff, it's the full moon today. Oh man. And based on my like very basic knowledge of that type of stuff, I feel like full moons are a good time to release things. So my little like message would be to like release an expectation around sex that you don't want to carry anymore.
I love it. Received. Thank you, Eva. This has been so good. You're amazing. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Tell us what Hogwarts house you identify with, and we can talk about it.
Yes, please. Thanks so much for having me, Marley.
Yay! Thank you so much for listening, loves. Isn't Eva just freaking incredible and such a wealth of knowledge and sex education information that we all need and deserve? Thank you, Eva. Everybody go follow them on Instagram at What's My Body Doing. Again, you'll see the links in the show notes below. Check out their program. I know it's going to be incredibly epic. And also, if this podcast is resonating with you, I'd be so grateful if you could share it and leave a review. It really helps us to amplify these messages. We have another epic guest episode coming next week, so stay tuned. Check out the Sensual Wholeness Academy deets below, and I'm sending you so much love.